I'm very interested in your Northwest Passage story, but before we get into that, I'd like to find out a bit more about you, because what you've achieved is you've got to be a little bit insane, I think, to even attempt some of the things that you've done. So I wanted to get a bit of a background of who you are. Like, where did you grow up? What's your background?
Yes, I grew up in Edinburgh, and I had a very outdoorsy childhood. My parents are both sort of proper adventurers, and many of our holidays were like camping or renting a lodge that had hiking and sailing nearby. So there was very much sort of second nature to me to be in the outdoors before I even started. But by the time I was a teenager, obviously I was bored of whatever the things my parents were interested in, and all I wanted to do was play rugby. Which sounds like a tangent, but that's become important to me in informing my adventures, because I miss the camaraderie of rugby, and I think I'm trying to replace it with the camaraderie of doing hard things in the outdoors.
So you enjoy doing it with lots of other people then, presumably?
So in the Northwest Passage I had a team we were called the Arctic Cowboys, 3 teammates, Wes, Jeff and Eileen. And I know some people do big adventures solo, and the things they get out of that are the tranquility and the meditative nature of being on your own. But I would never enjoy that. I want to have a shared experience, I want to have a shared goal, and I want to have a beer at the end and say, like, remember what we did together.
That sounds ideal, especially for people who are going to be watching this. Camping is all about community, and that's a lot of what we're about here at the club. So you went from Edinburgh, you're doing a bit of adventure stuff with as you were growing up, did a bit of rugby, and you followed that through to university, but you came south over the border, as it were, back into England. Where did you go to university?
So I was at Newcastle University. Not many outdoors activities going on for me there. It was mainly rugby still at that point. But it was really after university I moved to Hong Kong, and that's where my outdoor sort of love, or making it part of my day-to-day life, really got supercharged, because you don't realize, but Hong Kong is mainly these big beautiful mountains. The urban parts are very dense and small, so everybody is just hiking or doing outdoor activities there, and that's where it turned into something that I enjoyed doing, to something that I did all the time, sometimes after work, at the weekends. And then I moved back to the UK just in time to kayak the Northwest Passage, but it was that germinated the seed that had been planted back in the UK.
So you're doing some of those adventure bits in Hong Kong, you're doing a bit of trail running, you're doing a bit of hiking. When did you start getting on the water, as it were?
So initially I wanted to row the Atlantic, and I always had the Northwest Passage in the back of my mind. Thought that perhaps that was a stepping stone to becoming the first person to row the Northwest Passage. And as a result I started coastal rowing in Hong Kong, which again is amazing and beautiful. You get away from the city quickly, very beautiful textured coastlines that you can row around. So the combination between trying to do the Atlantic and also just falling in love with it on a smaller scale, and the coastal rowing was where it began. And then kayaking came as a tangent off the side of that.
Why were you falling in love with the Northwest Passage? What was it that was calling you to go and attempt that?
My motivation to do the Northwest Passage definitely changed over time. I think when I first heard about it, around about 2016, it was, I was young and I'd read these books about world firsts and polar exploration. I really saw that as an extension of all of those Victorian and Edwardian heroes that I wanted to be like, and I thought that this was not a gimmicky world first, but one that was rooted in that history. Over time, that motivation became more nuanced, less about the sort of external goal and the emulating my heroes, more about being in nature. I guess some of the conversations going on in wider society made me question the idea of trying to emulate those people who'd been to an area to explore where Inuit already lived. Not that I became woke overnight, but I just became more softer, I guess, in terms of thinking that I was somehow going to be like Amerston or Franklin or whatnot. So and it shifted away and became far more about being immersed in nature and having an experience of camaraderie. And then the world first was sort of just facilitators for that, rather than the end in itself.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. But I guess the legend of the Northwest Passage, I think you rattled off a few of the names there. But yes, it was about exploring it in those first instances in like the 18th century, the 19th century, you know, where we had explorers going there to sort of take it over, like you said, even though there were already natives there. But it was also, people wanted to conquer it as a shipping route as well, didn't they? You know, I think it was an easier way to get from sort of the eastern side of North America to essentially get to Asia.
So it wasn't colonized in like the sort of typical sense. There wasn't anything there specifically. There wasn't any like resources that we wanted. We wanted a shipping route as a shortcut from Europe to Asia. We couldn't go around South America because that was Spanish. We couldn't go around Africa. It was Dutch. Maybe we could go over the top. And the first people who to specifically go and look for that route were in the 1570s, Martin Frobisher. So it was a long old hunt for it. And by the time they found it in the 1850s, even though they were still looking, it'd become clear to everybody that even if it existed, it wasn't going to be like a viable route, because it's not like the shortcut was somewhat mitigated by, the deadly conditions and the fact that you'd spend years getting through. Even the first guy to get through, Roald Amundsen, he took 3 years. You know, he would get frozen in and then wait for 11 months or so before he could make a little dash again. And then you fast forward to now, 120 years after him, and the ice is disappearing for so long each year that maybe somebody could get through by human power. So it was something that the adventure community had been like circling around for a while, and since 2013 there's been rowers, kayakers, people trying in various hybrid boats to be the first people to do it in human power. Even this year there were 2 rowing teams who were racing us for it, and we're the only people who finished so far.
So your story with that crew, the Arctic Cowboys, it wasn't necessarily your crew to begin with, even though you had this sort of ambition to do it. How did that partnership come about? Because you were almost in rivalry with the people setting it up initially, weren't you?
Yeah, so I was part of a rowing team initially, and the kayaking team, the Arctic Cowboys, I suppose were our rivals. And you know, I was just seeing what worked and what didn't work, and I decided that the kayaking team was far more in line with perhaps the way that I wanted to approach it. One of the things that appealed to me was kayak is an Inuit invention, so it felt like a more immersive way. So I contacted them and I changed, and they took a big risk inviting me on because they didn't know me. I didn't have the same kayaking experience they have. My background was mainly in rowing, but they kindly said yes, and that's down to the expedition leader, West Hansen. So I owe him a great deal for having me on board and putting me under his wing.
And that lack of experience going into it did sort of create a few hairy moments, certainly in those first few weeks there. Well, you know, there were some scary life and death moments that you went through.
The big barrier initially, I suppose, with my lack of experience was I was much slower than them, and to the extent that the other 2 were getting cold on the first night waiting. And we thought that you know, with a bit of coaching, within a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, I might speed up, and I seemed to pick it up very quickly. So within sort of seemed to be a blip that first night, and within a day or 2 I was up to speed. And there was always a speed discrepancy, but it was never like that first night. And then after that, there wasn't necessarily like an issue with my inexperience per se, like in terms of safety. The things that put us in danger were very much external factors. Like the ice was just so dynamic, and when it got caught on the wind and caught on the tide, it could like shift very quickly, trap us sometimes. We spent a long time waiting just in this beautiful clear day, just floating in between bits of ice. I put the drone up, took some amazing pictures and some amazing videos as we just waited for it to part, and when it did, we turned around and got out of there as quickly as possible. But other times it moved so quickly we had no hope, and we ended up fighting for hours and hours just to make any headway, just desperately trying to get to shore. And on one occasion, as we were resting in this like piece of water in between the ice, contemplate our predicament, these 2 huge bits of ice just changed direction and started coming towards us like the trash compressor in Star Wars. And Eileen and I just, we didn't get out of the way quick enough, and just this irresistible force crushed into either side of us, tens of tons and you'd think in that second that we'd be ground to dust, but the bottom of a kayak is round, so instead of crushing us, it pinched the bottom and just lifted us up into the air. We got out of our kayaks very quickly and stood on the ice and thought, well, that was close. And waited until some more water appeared in between the ice and made a mad dash for shore. And that's a 30-second story, but the reality was from when we entered that ice to when we got out, it was maybe 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, wow. You mentioned Eileen there. Sorry, what was her full name?
Eileen Visser.
So you were partnered with her. She was very experienced. You were obviously less so. But how did those relationships develop over the course of the journey?
Well, Jeff and West are best friends from 30 years ago, and Eileen and I both joined the kayaking team roughly at the same time. So we were new to each other and new to them. So there was like different dynamics going on, and being in a kayak with Eileen, both like sort of experiencing this whole dynamic for the first time, we became very, very close and shared like lots of stories of old and experiences and life and death moments and effort together to keep that boat moving. And equally with West and Jeff on shore, and also talking across the water, we got to know them and got to see them sharing, stories, where they're sort of finishing each other's sentences about old kayaking races that they would tell us. So, obviously there's going to be dynamics and tensions at different points when you are sharing a 5-foot wide tent in the Arctic for 103 days. But when all is said and done, we shared like one thing in common, and that was like just this absolute dogged determination to get to the end. And when you have that focused task cohesion, then the social one sort of follows.
So when you finally got to shore, then each night or each time you wanted to rest, I think everybody here on the club site and all of the members who are going to be watching and reading, they understand the importance of community and helping each other out while you're all pitched up. What was your pitch looking like? How many tents did you have? How many sleeping bags did you have to share? What was it set up like?
So we had one 4-person tent, and each evening as we arrived, first and foremost, your core temperature would just plummet as soon as you stopped exercising. We got out of the boats, and the really painful moment was getting changed. You'd have to get naked in the Arctic before you could get dressed in your dry clothes. So West, almost like a script, we'd pull up the boats, we'd have a hurried moment of getting them out of the waves, and he'd say, get warm, get the tent up. Each night the same phrase. And then we'd get warm, but we'd get cold first in that panicked change. And then West and Jeff would put up the tent. Eileen would start making tea, so as soon as the tent was ready, we'd have a warm tea. And I'd either set up a windmill to charge our stuff, but often that wasn't viable, or I would begin immediately to walk off and try and find water. And even if I didn't get it at that point, I'd locate it. There's water up there, we can rest assured. So then we could collect it in the morning, for example. And then we get into a tent, we'd have tea, start making dinner. We each had our own sleeping bag, and the one thing that was awful was that we were soaked. We joked that we lived on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 was soaked and 0 was moist. And then what I was surprised about was there was a lot of firewood, particularly in the second half. There was a lot of firewood, and Jeff seemed to be some kind of like fire god, where he could get the dampest wood that you've ever seen to set on fire.
So all of this damp then, obviously you would occasionally get wet while you're out paddling, but was that because you were just essentially camping on snow, camping on ice? Is that the reason why it was
I think
wet?
it was raining more towards the end. It rained a lot, and then once you get wet, it's just really difficult to get dry. Even if we made a fire, we having to get up at 4 a.m, so having to go to bed early, so there wasn't time to necessarily like dry it for hours. And the air is so cold, that the saturation level was very low. So it's like your clothes don't just like dry naturally. We'd sometimes, if it was slightly warmer and we could be bothered, try and stay in our wet clothes and go for a walk around to dry them on us. And on one occasion we did have a 2 or 3 days stuck on shore where it was a windstorm but no rain. We set up a rope and hung our clothes and dried everything for a couple of days, and it was such sweet relief to put all these dry clothes on. And then within a couple of hours of starting and thinking how great is it to be dry again. I went for a wee, which required me to unzip my dry suit, and just as I did that, a wave poured over, and I was like, God, I got 3 days of this, and I'm back to being soaked. Yeah, but that was such was life. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, it sounds like quite an adventure, just doing the basic things, and of course it was. But your journey is, it captured headlines, and there's been a lot of interest in what you've achieved. As you said, it's a world first. Going along the Northwest Passage, it's not the only adventure that you've ever been on. You enjoy doing this type of activity, and turning it into a career now with your speaking appearances and that sort of stuff. You've been around the world, in many different countries. What are some of your favourite sort of around the world camping experiences? They can be the Northwest Passage, or they could be Mongolia, or
Hong Kong. I think there's probably a few that spring to mind. Very early in the Northwest Passage, there was a lot of ice in the water, and on one occasion we were trying to get off the water, but there was sheer cliffs straight up next to us, right. And there was a storm coming, and we didn't know how far we'd have to go before we could get off, and there was like a remnants of ice stuck to the bottom of one of the cliffs, just a little platform. So we pulled up onto that, and then there were these whales right next to the ice edge, just there breathing, oxygenating their water for their next long journey, bowhead whales. And we just watched them for a while, and it was absolutely wonderful. And then more ice got blown in, and then on the swells was grinding up against our little platform and taking it apart. So our semi-permanent ice cliff was just disappearing before our eyes, and we had to climb up and camp on some rocks above us. But something about the fact that it was so transient, that camping spot that doesn't exist anymore, just appeals to the romanticism I have of the wild. Then equally, I drove from London to Mongolia, and we camped next to the car as we went. And there are a few magnificent camping spots there. One next to Lake Van, I think, in Turkey. Beautiful, massive lake. And I just got out and stood up on a knoll above the lake and played my bagpipes, which is something I enjoyed a lot. One more camping spot in the UK. I kayaked around Mull with a friend, and some of those white beaches in the UK. So I've been to these far-flung places, had these really unique camping experiences, but some that stick with me are in the UK. I kayaked around Mull, for example, and camping on some of the white beaches there. Just, it's world class. You don't have to go to, the furthest corner of the globe to find something really, really beautiful. It's not like a diet version of camping. It's just as amazing. Before we go into, adventures at home, you mentioned that you took your bagpipes with you to Mongolia. Well, that's impressive. I drove them to Mongolia. I'd always take my bagpipes with me. I would have taken them to the Northwest Passage if they'd fit in my kayak. If I had done the rowing team, there might have been enough space. And the bagpipes are not for every occasion, but they are just built to be in big, grand landscapes, and they fill the space. And I would have loved to have heard them echoing off the cliffs around me in the Northwest Passage. But I'm sure my teammates would have eventually tired of the 4 tunes I know on repeat. But yeah, I took them to Mongolia, playing in some of those wilderness places, also busking in the lights of Prague. And when I first moved to Hong Kong, they definitely financially helped me with the busking in the street as some kind of strange novelty. So yeah, I do love my bagpipes. They are very much my travel companion. From Scotland then around the world, but you mentioned you do love staying in this country as well, and I don't blame you. There's some fantastic locations. We're very proud of all of the different club sites we've got, and I think there's something to be said about enjoying Britain as a holiday destination, even if you are British yourself. What are some of your favourite locations to be in the UK? And obviously, you being Scottish, you're going to have a bit of a bias, but yeah. Well, the thing that I think is so great about the UK, I think that since COVID, there's been a big movement to travel locally, and I know there's another author, adventurer guy who promotes micro ventures, and that's fantastic. But I think there's a misconception that it has to be micro and at home or big and abroad. And stay ventures, as I call them, I want to show that it can be big and at home. So hearing some of the stuff that people have done in the UK, like riding a horse from Land's End to John O'Groats, or kayaking the whole way around the British mainland, they really inspire me. And I've never done anything that big. I did last year kayak, or a couple of years ago now, kayaked down the west coast of Scotland and stopped and climbed Munros as I passed them. There's the mountains in Scotland over 3,000 feet. And that is just fantastic because it's so varied and so beautiful and so dramatic and contrasting, like the sea straight up into these big mountains. North Wales is somewhere I only recently visited for the first time. I thought it was going to be like the Scottish Highlands diet version, but it's actually just different. You know, it's like far more ridges, far more defined ridges, and really, really beautiful. And even since moving to London, people thought, well, you're going to be bored, do you like all these outdoor stuff? But the South Downs and the North Down Way, 100-mile each trails, and they're not like nipping through arable land or anything. They're through beautiful, beautiful woodlands, over undulating hills, varied from trees down to like the cliffs at the end. And something I'm really motivated to do is try and do each section of them before I leave London and go back to Scotland. You know, even if it takes a few years and a few free weekends, just do one here and one there. And it's all so accessible, but it's not in any way lesser.
So you've got you often go on these like stay ventures. What's your camping setup as you do go on some of these? Yeah,
I guess it would vary. If in a kayak, you can pack quite a lot in a kayak. So I'd have a tent, and I definitely have a couple of beers and a little camping stove and whatnot. But if I'm hiking, then I still have a tent, but maybe we're more frugal and we share a smaller tent and split the poles and the mats and that kind of stuff. So it can change a lot, but I do have my very old tent, which I'm pretty sure is the one that I was camping in as a kid with my parents on holiday, and I'm not sure how waterproof it is these days. But it's varied. Yeah.
You're a relatively new dad, past couple of years. Is that camping setup going to have to change in the coming years now?
I am so excited about doing some camping or outdoor stuff with my daughter and my son. We've already done some big hikes with the daughter, who's 20 months old now, and she was very happy to sit in the rucksack for up to 6 hours. We felt like 6 hours was a standard. Gone beyond that, she really caved, which is fair play to her. Now she's a bit older and she wants to walk. Maybe that timeline's going to come down, but in time, I'd love to do something, hiking with her in the rucksack and camping, introducing her to the outdoors, and then my son, when he's a bit older, he's only a few weeks now, and then when they're older, when they're teenagers, dream of hiking the West Highland Way with them and that kind of stuff. But I'm sure, like me, by the time they're teenagers, they will want nothing to do with my interests, and they'll all come back around in their 20s. But we'll see. Yeah,
I'm sure it is. But it is so important, even at that young age, to get people involved in the incredible outdoors. There's so much that you can do in so many safe ways. Why do you think getting out into the incredible outdoors is so important?
There's countless studies now to show the correlation between mental health, like low anxiety levels, and being outdoors, whether that's from a young age or even just as an adult taking a 20-minute walk in the wild near you. And if you ground them in that at a young age, then it sets them up for life. But equally, getting outdoors, getting muddy, climbing, falling, getting back up, breaking sticks and building dens, it's all confidence, creativity, self-awareness, coordination. It's all things that you want to set up with your kid, and you don't have to structure it so much. How am I going to do all these? Let's read a parenting book about how to install confidence in my daughter, and just take them out and let them do stuff and let them experiment, and then nature does it sort of for you. So it's easier said than done, and you might watch this video and think that I'm running through the hills with my toddler daughter, and the reality is we go to kids parties, and the weekends aren't like that idyllic thing, but when we can, we do.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think certainly as a new dad myself, I'm sort of appreciating what you're saying there. But when you do have time, make time and enjoy it as a family. That's great to hear. We've spoken about some of the adventures you've done in the past, but it sounds like you're still ambitious to do more in the future. What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, well, I spent so long dreaming about crossing the Atlantic by rowboat, then the Northwest Passage. It took up basically a quarter almost a quarter of my life, about 7 or 8 years, but I finished it when I was 32, so it's a big old chunk, and I think I missed what was under my nose. And we've spoken about stay ventures and the like, and that isn't, as I say, just something that I'm doing as a holding pattern before I can go on a real adventure. Like, I want to do something really big but domestic, and if you kayak the whole way around the British mainland, that is further than the Northwest Passage in miles, so there's no reason why you have to like curtail what you want to do. Having said that, I don't think I'll do anything that big. And equally, like, kayaking is just something I ended up doing this time, but I'd love to do a big hiking adventure, really big one. I did the Cape Wrath, half the Cape Wrath Trail with a friend when I was maybe 20 or 21. I'd love to do the whole thing. The Caledonia Canal, I'd love to go through the Caledonia Canal by kayak and then back over the top to Inverness, so doing a loop of the top of Britain. There's just so many. I don't even know where to begin. I'd love to just the west coast. There's an island called Rum on the small isles, and I've kayaked on Mull, kayaked on the west coast, like Arisaig, and I always look across at it, and something about it captures my imagination. I want to go over there, maybe by kayak, but then hike the hills on it and stay in the bothies. Yeah, there's some fantastic things, and when my children are able, I'd like to do some stuff with them. I think that'd be a really rewarding adventure. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can camp along the way the entire time, can't you? Yeah. No, well, that's great. Thanks for your time, Mark.
No worries.
It's been great learning all about your adventures. Cheers.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.